Hi, welcome to Quilting with Lori. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Today I want to share with you a really fun art quilt. This is a quilt that's using some scraps of batiks as well as some leaves. And I'm going to share with you today how I preserved those leaves and how I put this fun little quilt together. It's a small art quilt. It's about 14 by 12. You can make the quilt any size you want, depends on what kind of scraps you have available. And I will show you how to do this preservation of the leaves. It's a really fun quilt and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video tutorials that I put out. Make sure that you only hit the subscribe button once. If you hit it twice, then you will be unsubscribing. Don't forget to hit the notification button also if you'd like to be notified when I have a new YouTube tutorial that gets posted. Now let's take a look at how this art quilt is put together. The first thing we'll take a look at is how I preserved the leaves, and you'll see some of them here have been preserved. I used a product, it's a vegetable glycerin. You can just Google it online, and there are so many different places that you can purchase this at drugstores, at the Walmart, on Amazon, just anywhere. And I just got a small bottle this year, but if you plan to do a lot of preserving of leaves, you might want to get a larger bottle. But I just got some vegetable glycerin, and what you want to do for the recipe, it's 1 part glycerin to 4 parts water. So in my little bag, which I've put right in here, I have 1/4 cup of glycerin, and then I put 4 of the quarter cups of water in here. And this is how I've preserved them. I've got the leaves in there laying flat, and I put those leaves in there. These have been in for about 4 days. I like to keep my leaves in about 6 to 7 days to make sure that they're really preserved and make sure the stems and everything are covered in this glycerin concoction. And as you can see, I've pulled these out just yesterday and dried them off. They had a lot of the glycerin, and they feel, some of them are still a little crispy. This one is crispy, so the leaf itself was a little bit too aged by the time I picked it up. So this one I will trash. I will not be using that one. It's best to pull your leaves either from the tree right as they've fallen off the tree, or pull them off the tree limbs before they actually fall, because then they're more fresh and they will preserve much better. So all of these have a bit of a, I want to say rubbery, but that's not really the right term. But these are the leaves that I will actually use on my quilts, because they have a firmer texture, or I guess a more rubbery texture, so they're going to last longer on the quilts. This one's kind of crispy, so I won't be using that one. That one's kind of crispy. I won't be using that one. Here are some oak leaves. Really nice texture. I even did a little berry that I found off of our tree. But there's a lot of really pretty ones. Now, they went into the concoction, the glycerin concoction, very, very red. They don't come out as red, but the oak leaves went in brown and they came out brown. But they're just beautiful leaves. Here's one that sort of kept its red color. Now, that side right there is a little crispy, so I don't know that I'm going to use that one on a quilt. What I'm going to be doing is sewing on the veins of these leaves onto the quilt. That's how I will attach them. And because you've soaked them in glycerin for 5, 6, 7 days, you can certainly do that. Now, it's obviously a quilt that you're going to have to be very careful with. It's not a quilt that you'd ever want to wash. It's basically just a wall quilt that's going to hang. It is fragile, but they're really fun. So I hope you'll join me in creating that. So go outside, grab some leaves, maybe grab some pretty leaves off the tree branches just before they fall, because then they're the freshest. And then make your concoction of glycerin, 1 part glycerin to 4 parts water, and have them soak for anywhere from 4, 5, 6, 7 days. I like to go 6 to 7 days on mine. So now let's take a look at the supplies that you need for this little art quilt. So first of all, at the back here, I do have a backing. It's about 15 by 15 inches. So that's going to be my backing. I have a batting, and I did actually use some fusible webbing to web them together because I had 2 smaller pieces. But there's my batting, my backing, my batting. I am using, as I am appliquing all of this before I actually quilt it, I am using a sew-in stabilizer. Sulky has a sew-in stabilizer. Pellon has a sew-in stabilizer. It's a lightweight stabilizer. So just find a stabilizer that's a lightweight, and I just adhere it to the back, or you put it on the back as I'm appliquing. And it just certainly does help to stabilize everything as you're appliquing the fabric, as well as the geometric shapes here and the leaves. So I use that when I head upstairs to do the applique when I get to the sewing machine. Now let's take a look at the leaves and what we've done here. First of all, let's take a peek at the fabric. I have 3 pieces of fabric. You can do whatever you want for your art quilt. I just have what you would consider, I guess, the ground, the ground, and then the mid section and the sky, if you will. And I've just basically cut some curves. Nothing fancy, just some simple curves on those 2 pieces, and attach them over the top of the center section. And then what I'm going to do is applique this with a fancy stitch on my sewing machine. And then I just cut out some crazy geometric shapes. Just from the scraps that I had left over, I just started whacking away at it. I really didn't know what it was going to end up looking like. In fact, it may end up changing by the time I get upstairs and sew it together. But at this point, I'm just laying down light on the dark, dark on the light. And then I think I'll probably applique my leaves. Oh, maybe something like this. We'll see here. And when I applique the leaves, you'll see that when I get to the sewing machine, but I'm basically doing a zigzag over the stem and over some of the veins. Not all the way out, but just to some degree. I'll show you here on this quilt. You'll see, hopefully I've got it close enough, a lot of the leaf is 3-dimensional. It's not stuck to the quilt, just the zigzag, the stem and some of the veins. And here we've got the stems and some of the veins. Not all the way up, but part of the way up. So the leaves are 3-dimensional. They're not completely adhered to the quilt, as you can see. So let's head upstairs, and I will get to the sewing machine and start putting this together so you can see how to do this. Okay, so here I am at the sewing machine. I have my, basically the quilt itself laid out. First of all, I laid down my sew-in stabilizer, and you could use a lightweight fusible stabilizer if that's what you have. This just happens to be what I had. So I laid that down first. I placed my 3 pieces of fabric on top of it, and as you can see, the first one I laid down was the rectangle in the center, and then I laid down these 2 pieces, the top and the bottom, that have the curves, and I laid those just in a location that I felt looked good. And now I have loaded my machine with a thread that is an embroidery thread, and it's kind of a rust color or gold color thread, I guess is what I have in here. And the first thing I'm going to do is do a fancy stitch down both of these curves here to secure this. And it's called a patchwork fancy stitch on my machine, but you can use any fancy stitch you have. It's a great opportunity for you to use those fancy stitches on our sewing machines, because often we don't have an opportunity to do that. And this gives you that chance to have fun with those fancy stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and get working on this, and I'll be right back. I'll show you some of it, and then I'll show you the finished product. All right, so I have sewn down one side here. So this is this patchwork fancy stitch overlaps that raw edge so that it's all secure, and it also gives it a very pretty texture, a pretty look. And the reason that I like to use this sew-in stabilizer, or even a fusible stabilizer, lightweight, it just helps to give some body to the fabric so that when you're appliquing, the piece doesn't go up into your machine I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you, but that can be really irritating. So this just helps keep everything flat. Everything lays flat, it appliques nicely, and nothing is curling up inside the machine, and that can get really irritating. So that is the purpose of the sew-in stabilizer. It just helps everything to applique beautifully, nice and flat. Now I'll do the other side and I'll show you that. So hopefully you can see the stitches here under the screen. I'm trying to get it as close as possible, and it's just using a beautiful gold, a dark gold, kind of a rusty colored embroidery thread, and a nice fat patchwork stitch to secure everything down. So the fabric is now secured. Now I'm going to start playing with the arrangement of my geometric shapes and the leaves, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've been playing around with how I want to place the pieces on my sky, if you will, in my land here. And I think this is how I'm going to place them. So the first thing I'll do is applique each of the fabric pieces, the geometric pieces, onto the background first. Then I'll come back and I will applique the leaves on last. And I'm going to find a stitch, a fancy stitch, to applique these geometric shapes, a smaller stitch, because these are smaller applique pieces, and that particular fancy stitch is just too large. So I'm going to find something and I'll start working on that, and I'll come back and show you my progress. So now we have the applique all finished, so that the fabric pieces are appliqued down and the geometric shapes are appliqued down. And now I'm going to applique using just a zigzag. I'm using about a 3.5 wide zigzag on my machine, and I will start zigzagging at the bottom of the stem and working my way up to probably about there. And then I'll probably go just a short way up on these larger veins here, just to secure some of the leaves in there. I won't go all the way to the end, just maybe a ½ an inch up each of these veins. And I'll do the same on this one. So let me see if I can get the screen set up so that you can actually see this process as I'm sewing. Now that I'm where the leaf is, I'm going to make my zigzag stitch length shorter. So I'm going to bring it down to about a 2.5. I'm going to back stitch. All right, now I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up. Okay, so there is the leaf. The vein in the stem is stitched. I might just do a tiny little bit here and here on these veins. I really don't need to do much down here because these are really short and close. The leaves are shorter, they're closer to the stem itself. Might do a little bit here, here, and there. far, and I'm going to back stitch. And bring up my bobbin thread again. All right, so I'll do the rest of these. Let me show you this. So there's one. I'll do the rest of these and I'll be right back. So I'm trying to get this close enough where you can see this, but I have both of the leaves appliqued onto the background, and as you can see, I've just simply appliqued the stem, the main vein that goes down the leaf, and not all the way to the end, as you'll notice, and then I've just appliqued the main veins on some of the longer portions of the leaf. I didn't worry about these short ones here. Same on this leaf, I did the stem, the main vein, and some of these longer portions of these leaves. I did not do these shorter ones down here. And now that's all zigzagged and on there. Now I'm ready to add the backing with the batting and applique this quilt. So I have attached my walking foot to my machine, and now I'm going to quilt the quilt. I think I just mentioned a minute ago that I was going to applique, but actually I'm already finished the applique. Now I'm ready to quilt the quilt, and I'm using the walking foot, and I'm simply going to do some curvy lines across and back and forth across this little quilt. Not much, it doesn't really need much, but I'll go ahead and do this, and I'll show you in a minute just what I've done for the quilting. So I have quilted the little quilt. I've used my walking foot. I've used the same gold rust colored embroidery thread to quilt the quilt, and I just used a few wavy lines, as you'll see on here. I didn't do a whole lot. I lifted up the leaf as I went under that, lifted up the leaf here as I quilted under there. Didn't do a whole lot of quilting. I was very gentle with the quilt, probably maybe 7 lines of quilting throughout the whole thing. It doesn't need a whole lot. It's simply going to be a wall quilt. And now I'm going to square this up, and then we'll add some binding to bind the quilt. So I have squared up the quiltlet. It's about a 14 by 13.5 inch square, and I have attached just 2-inch binding. I like to use a more narrow binding on art quilts like this, so it's just a 2-inch wide binding, and I've already attached that from the back side, and I'm going to bring it around to the front and use a fancy stitch to attach it to the front. So that will be another beautiful stitch that you'll see from the front of the quilt. So let me do that and I'll be right back. So here are both of the quiltlets that I've finished for you. Here's the one that you saw at the beginning of the class, and here's the one that I've just finished as I've done this tutorial for you. And I did attach just a 2-inch binding, and I secured it on the front side instead of on the back using a fancy stitch. So I've got a couple of different fancy stitches that I've used on this quilt for appliquing as well as for attaching the binding and the leaves and so forth. Just a really fun quilt. Again, you're using glycerin to preserve the leaves. The ratio is 1 part glycerin to 4 parts water. And I like to soak my leaves, keep them flat in a pan. I like to do it in a baggie, as I showed you earlier. I like to do it for anywhere from 4 to 7 days, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, as long as you can. Sometimes we get impatient, we want to get to work on them right away, but the longer you soak them, the better they're going to be for the purposes of this. Now, they're sturdy leaves, but they are, of course, they're fragile. It's an art quilt. It's not a quilt that you're gonna be rough and tough with. You're gonna hang it on the wall. You're obviously never gonna wash this because your leaves are not gonna hold up under that, but they're really fun quilts to make, great gifts for family members, and maybe even something that you might want to put together for a craft show if you're involved in craft shows. So hopefully you have enjoyed this tutorial on making scrappy leaf quilts, and leave me some comments below if you have any questions. I love to hear comments from my viewers, or even add some more information if you have some questions. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this fun scrappy leaf art quilt, and I hope to hear from you. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.